Welcome back to Andersen Acres. We're in the kitchen tonight, and we are going to make something fun and delicious and completely not good for you. We are going to make a basic yeast donut. These are going to be deep fried. You could, in theory, bake them, but they will not be as good. There's a reason deep fried is so delicious. It's also terrible for you, but we're doing it anyway because you can't always be super healthy. Also, my kids love them. So, what are you going to do? We don't make them every day. That's why you haven't seen me make them before. But once in a while, yeah, I do it. We are going to make our dough in our bread maker. So it will mix, knead, and do the first rise for us. It just makes things a little bit easier. And it means I don't have to spend quite as much time monitoring my donuts. So let's get started. We're going to start with 2 eggs. Yes, you need the eggs. Definitely need eggs. We are also going to do about a 1/4 cup of butter. Use butter, not margarine. That's important in this recipe. We're going to do a teaspoon of vanilla extract. It really pumps up the flavor. 1/2 teaspoon of salt. A full 1/2 cup of sugar. They are donuts after all, and they are quite sugary. Then we're going to do 3/4 cup of water. Don't use milk. Milk changes the flavor. This recipe really is better using water. 3 cups of all-purpose or bread flour, whichever you're using, doesn't matter that much. And 1 heaping teaspoon of bread machine yeast. You can use quick rise yeast. You can do this by hand, obviously, like you can any bread dough. You just would use a traditional yeast and dissolve it first. So that's it for our ingredients. We will pop that in the bread maker and come back in about 1.5 hours and start shaping our donuts. Well, our dough is finished. Remember, this is going to be a slightly stickier dough, so have a cup of flour sitting nearby just so you can flour the area, and that way your dough doesn't stick. Now, for this particular step, you are going to need a couple of things. One, your dough, obviously. You need your dough. But you also need a rolling pin. I'm using this rolling pin where I can remove these rings to make it a narrower gap in here so that I can get a thinner dough. But I am doing the 3/8 of an inch height because that's a good height for donuts. Because remember, they do rise afterwards. Okay? You also need donut cutters. You can have either size. I have a little one and a big one. I'm going to be using both. But you can have either size. It doesn't matter which size you use. You do need a donut cutter. It is hard to shape these by hand. You can try, but it's going to be difficult. So just take a moment to press all the air out of your dough. There we go. Flip it over a couple of times so you can get all that air out. Just kind of mash that air. There we go. Flip it back over this way. There we go. Take these out of the way for the minute. Then we're going to take our dough and roll it out. You just want to roll it nicely, roll it gently. You don't want to be too rough, but I mean, it's bread dough. Ultimately, what's the worst that can happen? Okay. I'm just going to roll that. Doesn't really matter what shape you roll it into because remember, it's definitely going to get cut. So you just let it spring back into shape. I'm just going to grab my cookie sheet and I'm going to cut 1 large donut, press down and give it a good twist. You can even break this like that. Lift that up. I'll do a little one. There we go. So we have a little donut and a big donut. So we're going to put on our, move these out of the way for this a minute. On our cookie sheet, we're going to put our little donuts and our big donuts, and we're going to put our donut holes. Save those donut holes. They're delicious. You don't need to re-roll them. And so I'm just going to pull this donut hole out of there. It got stuck. So you just kind of throw these on a cookie sheet. Give them a little room to rise because they do need that. But you just keep cutting, keep going. Any size you like. It doesn't really matter. So if you want big ones, you do big ones. If you want little ones, you do little ones. It honestly Doesn't matter. Okay? Just do it. There we go. And then I'm going to take my little one and get a couple of little ones. There. Easy to do. So you just lift them up, throw them on your pans. Just make sure they're not touching each other because that's not going to help you. All right, so we'll come back as soon as I'm done moving all of these guys because you don't need to watch me fiddle with them on the pan. All right, so I've got some big ones and some little ones on my pan now. So I can set those aside to rise. It's going to take about an hour. What do you do with this leftover dough? Well, you're going to re-roll it, but it does take a few minutes for your dough to relax. So just kind of mash it together. You don't have to do actual kneading. You can. If you want to sit here and do actual kneading to mix it together, that's fine too. Either way, no matter how you do it, get it all together so that it looks nice and neat. Now you're going to have to let that sit for 10 minutes to relax. You can't just immediately roll this out. It's not really going to stay. Always give your dough time to relax. So I'm going to let this one sit to relax. Then I'll cut some more. I'm not going to show you that part. You don't really need to see it. But I'll load up my tray with my donuts and then I will put them aside to rise. Pick somewhere warm and slightly damp. I'll use my microwave, but you can just cover with a damp tea towel. Make sure that damp tea towel doesn't touch the donuts. You don't want them sticking to anything. But you do need to let them rise for about an hour or so. That's just how long it takes. You can't rush them just like any other yeast bread. So we'll come back when everything is risen and looking good. All right, so our donuts have risen. They're looking decent. They'll puff up more in the deep fryer. So over here's my deep fryer. Here's what you need to have. You need a deep fryer. It doesn't have to be this one. You can also do it in a pot on the stove. I use this deep fryer. I've used it this is 4 or 5 years old now. I do recommend this one. This is the Easy Clean or whatever they call it by Tefal. I like this one because one, temperature gauge. That's important. But also you can filter and store your oil in it, and I really like that. So I do recommend this one. I'll put a link to it in the description, I promise. Try not to forget. But you do need some kind of thing to hold your oil. I like using an actual deep fryer. You might decide you're going to use something else. Okay, you might use a pot on the stove. A pot on the stove is just fine. Turn that a little more. A pot on the stove is just fine. You do want to heat your oil to about 365 degrees Fahrenheit, which is roughly 185 degrees Celsius. You do need to heat it to that point. It has to be that hot, but not hotter. So, if you don't use a deep fryer with a temperature gauge, you might want to get yourself a thermometer that is for deep frying. This one is for candy and deep frying. But you do want something to tell how hot your oil is. You don't want it too hot or too cold because it won't work. So get yourself a thermometer if you don't use a deep fryer. Okay, if you don't have a temperature gauge, you'll need a thermometer. Either way. You're also going to need a rack to cool your donuts on. They do have to cool 100%, so we're going to need this rack here. You also need some tongs to flip your donuts. You need tongs. Tongs. So I'm using tongs that are metal because they're going into hot oil. Don't try to use something plastic. It'll melt. Okay, so frying the actual donuts. We actually do not need the lid for this particular thing. We have this basket. We're going to drop the basket into the oil. It actually sits up out of the oil in order to drain the donuts or your French fries or whatever you're making. We're doing donuts. But we drop it into the oil because we do not want it out and exposed. So we're just going to fry a few. I'm going to drop 3 donuts into the oil. 1, 2, 3. Now you want to deep fry them a couple minutes on each side. You want to make sure they get thoroughly cooked. So you want them browned. Kind of move them around. If they're sticking, you want to push them a little bit so they don't stick to the basket. So we are going to have to flip them after a couple of minutes. They are looking pretty good. You know, it's between 2 and 5 minutes per side. If your oil is at the correct temperature, they get the correct color and you don't have to time it too much. So I'm checking, that's not dark enough. When I flip, you'll see how dark they need to be. But they do cook thoroughly in the oil if you wait for the right color, provided your oil is at the correct temperature. So again, 365 to 370 for your oil, Fahrenheit. Somewhere in that range. You don't want to go up higher than that. So we're just letting them bubble away. Checking this one. Okay, I'm going to flip this guy. Flip, flip, flip. Because they went in pretty close together, so I'm flipping them together. Okay. See that golden color? That's what you're looking for. So it's looking really good. They smell good. Smell like donuts. Because, I mean, you're deep frying dough with sugar in it. So it's delicious. It smells good. It's fantastic. So now we're going to wait until the other side of the donut is the correct color. They do cook thoroughly, I promise. So they are not undercooked if you wait for this golden color, as long as your oil's at the right temperature. So those are larger donuts. I'll fry up a couple of smaller ones. You can fry your donut holes as well. Here we call them Timbits. So fry them up. Then we're going to drain them on our rack. They do need to sit on the rack until they are 100% cool. We can't put any kind of glaze or sugar them or anything if they are still warm. Not quite on that side. Just going to give them a minute. Give them a shake here and there. You see they are looking really fantastic. And let's just check. There we go. So we lift them, hang our basket, and then I'll fry some smaller ones. You can fry whatever you like. You can do big ones, small ones, it doesn't matter. So I'm just going to stand these guys up so the oil drains off them a little bit better. Remember, don't squish your donuts because then they're squished. I want squished. I want nice donuts. There we go. So then take your donuts, put them on your rack so they can cool completely. They do need to be on a rack. Okay, they absolutely have to be on a rack like that. They have to be sitting on a rack. If they're not sitting on a rack, then what'll happen is they'll get soggy. They have to cool on a rack. All right, so again, we're dropping our basket back in. This time I'm putting some small ones. 2, 3, 4, and I'll throw in a couple of donut holes for fun. Ow. Remember, oil's hot, it burns. So again, we just wait for the dough to brown, and they are beautiful donuts. They taste really good. I'm going to stop recording here because I have a lot of them to fry, and there's no point in you watching me deep fry donuts over and over and over again. So after I turn these, see the donut holes fry up nice too. Okay? So you fry your donuts, your donut holes, you flip them in between when they hit the right color, and we'll come back when they are all on the rack and 100% cool. All right, so our donuts are fried, all of them. I have the large donuts, the smaller donuts, and on the bottom I have the donut holes. We call them Timbits here. So you can do a lot of things. You can dip them in icing, you can put glaze on them. I'm just going to do a basic sugar donut. So what you do to do a sugar donut is you take a paper bag, not plastic, and you just take some basic white sugar and you put some white sugar in a bag. No big deal. Probably don't need a ton, but I am going to do a little bit more than that. Okay, so I'll do a little bit more. Probably about half a cup or so, depending on how many donuts you're going to coat. So then I'm going to take a donut, put it in the bag, fold the top down a couple of times, give it a shake. It's like shake and bake, but for donuts. Then you reach in, take your donut out, pow, sugared donut. So you can sugar your donuts, you can leave them plain, you can put icing on them, you can do whatever you like. They are your donuts, you made them, do whatever you like with them. So I hope you enjoyed making donuts with us here today at Andersen Acres. Hopefully we will see you tomorrow.